March, police say that's when a delivery truck loaded with $6.9 million worth of cell phones and tablets was hijacked by two suspects who were armed with a gun. Now, this happened in the area of Steeles Avenue.
When you hear the word heist, you probably think of something like an orchestrated bank robbery, or maybe thieves stealing duffel bags worth of diamonds from a jewelry store. You see it in films and video games all the time, and usually it's pretty exaggerated and over the top, but these scenarios do happen in real life as well, and when they do, the story tends to make national or even international headlines. And depending on how significant it is, it could become the subject for movies based on real events or documentaries down the line. And although banks, jewelry stores, and armored trucks are most common on the big screen, those aren't the only targets for criminals, because evidently they aren't too picky, and nothing is off limits. More often than those mastermind missions you hear about, there are smaller scale heists that go almost unnoticed in the media, which brings us to the topic of this video. We'll take a look at a multi-million-dollar heist that was pulled off by a group of Brampton men in 2019, and also go over the string of crimes they commit in the months that followed. While other robbers had their eyes on bank vaults, Brinks trucks, and expensive gems, these perps were focused on electronics. More so, they were focused on the trucks that were transporting those electronics.
Cargo thieves more brazen than ever, targeting tractor-trailer lots around the Greater Toronto area.
It is definitely a concern. Cargo theft has been a concern for the last 5 years.
Cargo theft in Canada isn't anything new, and it's been costing the country billions of dollars each year. Ontario, more specifically the Greater Toronto area, is described as being a hotbed for culprits looking to get their hands on freight. In just half a decade, hundreds of tractors and trailers have been stolen, mainly in the Peel and York regions, and at one point that number spiked, and it was rapidly increasing every year. There are a few different news articles that highlight the surge in cargo thefts, but more recently there was one published in January of 2020, just days after a stolen tractor trailer crashed into a gas station in Mississauga. The truck wasn't being pursued by the police at the time, but the driver was speeding through the intersection of Mavis Road and Eglinton Avenue West when it collided with two vehicles before crashing into a large sign. The tractor was torn to pieces, while the trailer was knocked onto its side, with a delivery of meat sprawled out on the road. Looking at the scene of the crash, it's no surprise that the driver didn't make it out of the wreck. The theft was just one of many alike in the GTA, but the aftermath definitely emphasized the growing problem. Stealing a delivery truck is described as being a low-risk, high-reward type of crime, which is making it more common. With tons of goods being transported on public roads daily, some people see it as an opportunity to make some dirty money, and that was the plan for a handful of men from Brampton. This is a good time to introduce the stick-up crew of this story. There were 6 men in the group: Dexter Abrams, Ian Mitchell, Chris Mornan, Garnett Ricketts, Kendrick Young, and lastly, Cecil Young, who was far from being what his last name may suggest. At 75 years old, Cecil was the senior of the pack, while the other members were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. They aren't entirely elderly, like a news article was titled, but the agent suspects were proving that crime wasn't just a young man's game. So I know most of them are technically a part of Generation X, except for a few, but for the sake of a catchy name, let's call them the Brampton Boomer Bandits. This is the story about how their successful heist was later foiled at the hands of technology, a boomer's worst nightmare. Now let's go back in time a few years to the spring when it all started. It's reported by police that the group is allegedly tied to robberies and thefts from as far back as May of 2018, but there aren't any details aside from that. The first documented incident, though, occurred in Brampton on March 13, 2019, around the Steeles Avenue East and Goreway Drive area. Just before 8 p.m. that night, a delivery truck filled with high-end electronics was loaded and ready for transport. What began as a routine shift for the driver was about to become a workday that he would never forget. Before the truck could leave the warehouse lot where it was loaded, the driver was cut off by a dark-colored Lexus IS, while another car involved, a silver Acura TL, was close by. 2 men hopped out of the Lexus, both armed with handguns, and approached the truck. They forced their way into the cab before making their demands to the driver, who was a 33-year-old man. At gunpoint, they ordered him to drive a few miles away to an industrial plaza around Clark Boulevard and Summerlee Road, while the other suspect cars followed. After a short drive, they arrived at the plaza, where another truck was already there waiting. That's when the suspects unloaded all of the merchandise from the hijack truck and packed it into the getaway truck. Over 8,500 devices were stolen, which had a retail value of just under $7 million. Once all of the goods were transferred, the suspects made their escape into the night, leaving the driver at the scene, who was not only behind schedule, but also had a missing delivery. Fortunately, he was unharmed, and the perps didn't take his truck or his phone, so he was able to call the police right once the group made their getaway. The prompt 911 call still wasn't fast enough because none of the suspects were caught that day, and their heist essentially went without a hitch. For the Boomer Bandits, it was a lucrative haul that was about to turn into a big payout, or at least that's what they thought. There was one major problem with their plan, which only surfaced after the fact, and it had to do with modern technology. As you may know, most, if not all, new phones and other devices have security measures in place for if it gets lost or stolen. For example, on Apple devices, there's an app called Find My, which allows the owner to track its whereabouts, and they can also enforce an activation lock through their iCloud account. On Android devices, owners can use their Google accounts to enable factory reset protection, which prevents it from being used after it's wiped. But even before a device reaches a consumer, manufacturers and mobile carriers still have control over it. Once a device is reported lost or stolen, it becomes blacklisted, which essentially blocks cellular services, in the case that someone bypasses the other layers of security. It's these kinds of features that can transform a device worth hundreds of dollars into a paperweight, and it definitely acts as a theft deterrent. There's not much motivation to try and steal something if it becomes worthless the moment it's reported missing. For those who are even remotely tech savvy, hearing about these things probably isn't new information, but it may have been a new concept for the Boomer Bandits. All 8,500 devices, which included smartphones and tablets from a variety of brands, like Apple, LG, Motorola, and Samsung, were remotely locked and blacklisted, rendering them virtually useless. With just the press of a button, millions of dollars worth of devices were reduced to whatever they were worth in parts. It was a harsh reality check for the pack of suspects, who likely thought that they could easily flip the goods for some big bucks. Instead, the men were sitting on piles of worthless electronics, but they still had their freedom, at least for the time being. Since their last job ended up being a bust, they had to recoup their losses, so the group decided to plan out another robbery that they would pull off just a few months later. The next incident took place on July 28, 2019, in Halton Hills, a town just west of Brampton. A couple hours after midnight, in the Steeles Avenue and Winston Churchill Boulevard area, two trucks without trailers approached a cargo yard and were stopped at the entrance. A security guard who was posted at the front gate walked up to one of the trucks and began speaking with the driver, when suddenly an armed suspect snuck up from the side and grabbed the man. The assailant then put the guard in a headlock as he pressed a silver handgun against his body, demanding that the front gate be opened. The guard was then pushed through the walkway of the entrance, directly into the frame of a surveillance camera. The victim pointed at the camera and appeared to say something, seemingly letting the suspect know that he was on live CCTV. Once the gunman realized that he was in fact being recorded, he and the rest of the suspects got spooked and aborted the mission, fleeing in their trucks empty-handed. The security guard was roughed up, but not seriously injured in the event. I don't know what the group intended to rob in that cargo yard, but their plan was halted by a gate and a few well-placed cameras. By then, they were already on the radar of Peel Police, and they were ever since the electronics heist from months before. An investigation was open, and as the project grew, eventually a few other agencies jumped on board, including Canada Border Services Agency, Halton Regional Police, and Barrie Police Service. The authorities had a hunch that the attempted robbery at the cargo yard was committed by the same perps behind the hijacked delivery truck, and they were a step closer to catching them. At this point, you'd probably think that the Boomer Bandits would just quit while they were ahead, considering they now had 2 botched jobs under their belts. But the group wasn't quite finished yet, and not being caught for their previous crimes seemed to only boost their confidence, and so they continued their spree that summer. About a month after their last failed attempt, the bandits were back at it again, and this time they had their eyes on a truck yard in Mississauga. According to the police, during the early morning of August 25th, 2019, the group snuck onto a property and stole 3 commercial trucks, 2 of which were connected to trailers. For once, their plan went smoothly from start to finish, and they managed to escape with the vehicles. But hours after getting away, their luck would finally run out. It's reported that the police were monitoring the suspects, and later that same day in Mississauga, they intercepted one of their cars. 4 of the 6 men in the ring were arrested, and it's alleged that they were on their way to a warehouse to commit yet another robbery or possibly hijacking. Inside the suspect's vehicle, police found a loaded Smith & Wesson handgun, which looked similar to the weapon the gunman was holding in that surveillance video. There was also suspicious paraphernalia found, such as duct tape, rope, zip ties, and bear spray. With items like that in the car, along with their track record, there's no question that the men were on their way to do something unlawful, and the police caught them in the nick of time. With a majority of the Boomer Bandits behind bars, it wouldn't be long before the authorities had the whole squad in custody. A few weeks later, in September of 2019, investigators from the Central Robbery Bureau, assisted by tactical, canine, and uniformed officers, tracked down the remaining 2 suspects to an undisclosed location, and they were apprehended. The entire stick-up crew was in custody at last, and that same month, all of the men appeared together in a Brampton courtroom for their preliminary hearings. Between the 6 of them, they faced a total of 63 charges, including robbery, kidnapping, theft of a motor vehicle, possession of a loaded restricted firearm, and multiple counts of others. All of the offenses stemmed from the 3 separate incidents that the Boomer Bandits were allegedly connected to. With the help of some of the businesses who were affected by the theft, the police brought the men to face justice, and their 6-month-long investigation paid off. That being said, the case has yet to go to trial, so all of the accused suspects are innocent until proven guilty. There's still a chance that they could have their charges dropped and walk free, however slim that chance may be. It likely isn't their first time being locked up either, because it was reported that all of the suspects were known to police, and it was said that they were tied to communities all throughout eastern and western Canada, although it was noted that none of the men were connected to any known gangs or large-scale enterprises. Each member of the entourage is potentially facing a hefty prison sentence, and to make matters worse, they don't really have much to show for their crimes. They were able to steal 3 commercial trucks in their final mission, but since they're reported stolen, the vehicles will probably be recovered at some point or another, and aside from that, there isn't much else left over. The most notable heist, which was supposed to rake in millions of dollars, turned out to be a flop that brought in thousands at best. As for the remainder of the stolen goods, well, the police were able to recover some of the electronics, but not all of them. There's a possibility that the rest of the phones and tablets were sold, to be later unlocked through some shady means, or just stripped down and sold for parts. Whatever the case is, it must have been a rude awakening for the suspects when they found out that they wouldn't be making nearly as much money as they imagined. In early October of 2019, a couple of weeks after the accused men appeared in court, the story was picked up by a bunch of different news outlets in the GTA and beyond. Since cargo trucks being robbed isn't a rare occurrence in the province or even the country, that aspect didn't catch anyone by surprise. What did was not only the value of the stolen goods, but also the age of the suspects, which seemed to be scrutinized in nearly all of the articles. It looks like some reporters were having a field day while writing about the group, and made sure to slide in their share of wisecracks. From one journalist teasing that the oldest suspect, Cecil, was trying to put together retirement money, to another one nicknaming the pack the Garrito Gang. The accused men weren't cut any slack from the press. One detective in the case even admits that he was surprised by the age of the eldest, Cecil. As Ontario continues to see an uptick in cargo theft, Peel Police Constable Akil Mukin provided some advice to anyone who is involved in the transport of goods. He advised that the number of people who know details about a high-value load should be minimal, to reduce the chance of the information making it to the wrong ears, because if it does, the delivery can certainly become a target. On the other hand, I'm sure there are some instances where criminals just rob trucks at random, without knowing any specifics of the load. It's sort of like those auctions where people bid on a storage locker and hope something valuable is hidden inside, but instead of bidders and a storage locker, it's robbers and a stolen truck. For them, it may seem like a trailer is a safe on wheels, but not everyone keeps stacks of cash and spare key fobs for their sports cars inside their safes. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there may be a multi-million-dollar delivery of PlayStation 5s in the back, or it could be a few $1,000s worth of bananas from Guatemala. With a lot of trailers on the road being unmarked, or just bearing a company name, there's usually no telling what's inside, unless you have inside intelligence, which is a whole different issue. But as I said earlier, the culprits behind these crimes aren't picky, and they've proved that they would settle for just about anything they can get their hands on. In the past, a trailer filled with $50,000 worth of milk was stolen in Mississauga, and in a separate incident in Hamilton, robbers made off with $100,000 worth of blueberries and other fruit. More recently, in December of 2020, a $600,000 delivery worth of chocolate was stolen in Vaughan. These are just a few examples of seemingly random goods that have fell victim to cargo theft. Now, I'm not sure how a criminal would sell their stock of milk, fruit, or any type of food for that matter, but some of them are indeed crafty and resourceful. Plus, there's a black market for almost everything these days. Overall, it just goes to show that not every stolen delivery results in a big payout, and the perps in this story found that out the hard way. The men have already been in custody for nearly 2 years, and will remain so until they appear in court to fight their charges, but there's no word on when that was or will be. I searched around on Canly, and there's no documentation on the proceedings, so the case hasn't yet gone to trial, or just isn't published. With their prior rap sheets, along with the weight of their new charges, the defendants will need some top-of-the-line lawyers in their corners. If they're found guilty, then it's pretty obvious where they'll be for the foreseeable future. But if the group manages to beat their cases and walk free, then there's no telling when the Boomer Bandits will strike again, or who or what their target will be. From young whippersnappers to old-timers, there's no age limit when it comes to crime, but the law is also something that doesn't discriminate.